Well, welcome everyone to the San Diego ULT Aquarian Series. And this is a series of weekly presentations derived from the Aquarian Almanac. And this week, our topic is soul education. And we are honored to have Dr. Barbara A. Baer, who is the General Secretary of the American section of the Theosophical Society. And she will be speaking today on this topic, and then afterwards there'll be time for questions and answers. The Hermes quote is, "All true soul education is an unfoldment through worship and affection, and it is open to every human being to make all life a celebration of learning." And it is my honor and privilege to turn this meeting over to Dr. Barbara A. Baer.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you again today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I, I, I do have a PowerPoint, mostly because I've included quite a few quotes. And so I feel like when there are a lot of quotes, it's helpful to also be able to read what is happening. When Jonathan contacted me about 6 months ago and invited me to speak, I was thrilled and honored, and of course said yes. However, when I started researching regarding this topic, I thought, oh wow, this is a bit overwhelming. As with most concepts in the Ageless Wisdom, it seems simple enough from a peripheral perspective, but as we begin to delve into it, we find a depth and breadth that could and likely will leave us exploring for lifetimes. So today we are going to, let's see, come on, there. We're going to start off with defining terms to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. We'll move on to a discussion about spiritual evolution. And then finally, we will talk about some very practical aspects of soul education. So let's start with at the beginning with something that is actually quite easy, definitions, or at least the definition of education. From the Merriam-Webster online dictionary, we find that education can be defined as the act of imparting or acquiring general or specific knowledge or skills, developing the powers of reasoning and judgment, and preparing oneself or others intellectually for mature life. So, education is a means of preparation. This makes sense. We go to school or we take courses in order to prepare ourselves to undertake a task, to begin a career, to learn about life and the world in which we live. However, when we define soul, it is clear that we must go further than a simple dictionary definition. We're using the word in a very specific and particular manner. So for our discussion, we really need to define soul as it is used in a theosophical context. And for this, it is best to use definitions given by H.P. Blavatsky, who is co-founder along with Colonel Olcott, William Judge, and others of the founding of the Theosophical Society. For some of you, this information is likely a review, yet it's pertinent to remind ourselves of the information as we explore further. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB refers to Sennett's book, Esoteric Buddhism, in which he uses terminology that identifies three types of souls: animal, human, and spiritual. Further in the text, she tells us that soul, being a generic term, there are in humans three aspects of soul: the terrestrial or animal, the human soul, and the spiritual soul. These, strictly speaking, are one soul in its three aspects. She equates manas, typically translated as mind, as the soul in general, clarifying that it has two aspects. She says, we have manas, or the soul in general, in its two aspects. When attaching itself to Anoya, or Kamarupa, or the animal soul in esoteric Buddhism, it runs toward entire annihilation as far as the personal ego is concerned. When allying itself to the nous, Atma Buddhi, it merges into the immortal, imperishable ego, and then its spiritual consciousness of the personal that was becomes immortal. So while there are many ways to define soul, it makes sense for our discussion to look at what HPB refers to as the human soul, or in theosophical terminology, manas. However, it is a particular aspect of manas that we are discussing. Manas, according to the theosophical teachings, is divided into two aspects, as it says here in HPB's quote from Key to Theosophy. Typically described as higher and lower manas, or higher and lower mind. Manas, we understand, is a field of consciousness that provides a bridge between the physical and spiritual components of a human being. It has the capacity to incline in either direction, either lower toward Kama, or the emotional field of consciousness, or higher toward Buddhi, which is the spiritual field of consciousness. In her article, Occultism versus the Occult Arts, HPB writes, the personal or human soul is a compound in its highest form of spiritual aspirations, volitions, and divine love, and in its lower aspect of animal desires and terrestrial passions imparted to it by its associations with its vehicle, the seat of all these. It thus stands as a link and a medium between the animal nature of man, which its higher reason seeks to subdue, and his divine spiritual nature, to which it gravitates whenever it has the upper hand in its struggle with the inner animal. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB tells us that when higher manas is illuminated by the Buddhic aspect of consciousness, it is referred to as Buddhimanas, also called the causal body. It is this aspect of a human being that connects with the personality, and it is through the experiences of physical existence, the experiences gleaned from the personality, that causes the soul to flower. So, returning to definitions, we can define soul for our purposes, for our discussion today, as the causal body, or higher manas, illuminated by our Buddhic nature. Now, I know you are aware of this, but it never hurts to remind ourselves that while we use terms like higher and lower, it's important to recognize that nothing about the constitution of a human being is directional. Rather, these are terms that describe density of matter and its frequency of vibrations. Higher, indicating less density of matter and a more rapid frequency of vibration, while lower is the opposite, denser matter with a slower frequency of vibration. Furthermore, we talk about these spiritual aspects of the self as distinct and separate, which is inaccurate. There is no separation. They're all interpenetrating, defined by their frequency of vibration and density of matter. So, the next step in exploring the education of the soul is an exploration of the concept of progressive development or spiritual evolution. In The Secret Doctrine, HPB writes, the occultists believe in an inherent law of progressive development. And in The Key to Theosophy, she tells us, it is a belief in a perpetual progress for each incarnating ego or divine soul, in an evolution from the outward into the inward, from the material to the spiritual, arriving at the end of each stage at absolute unity with the divine principle. From strength to strength, from beauty and perfection of one plane to the greater beauty and perfection of another, with accessions of new glory, of fresh knowledge and power in each cycle. Such is the destiny of every ego. This concept tells us that each one of us is making spiritual progress, moving from an external focus to an internal one, from a material perspective to a spiritual, increasingly spiritual perspective. Former international president of the T.S. Adyar, In Sri Ram, writes, the possibility of such regeneration, even the predestination of it, is perhaps the most inspiring truth of theosophy. Vic Hao Chen, in his article on theosophy.world about evolution, tells us spiritual evolution is a process in nature arising from an innate impulse in all things in nature to unfold their potential. And while the Ageless Wisdom teachings talk about this inevitable progressive movement, it does not mean that it occurs without effort on our part. The Mahatma M wrote in letter number 44 in the chronological edition, nothing in nature springs into existence suddenly, all being subjected to the same law of gradual evolution. The progressive development of each soul, each one of us, is slow, fraught with effort, and yet inevitable. The soul's responsibility or role, therefore, is to evolve. William Q. Judge talks about evolution in his chapter on reincarnation in Ocean of Theosophy, saying, what then is the universe for? And for what final purpose is man, the immortal thinker, here in evolution? It is all for the experience and emancipation of the soul, for the purpose of raising the entire mass of manifested matter up to the stature, nature, and dignity of conscious godhood. The great aim is to reach self-consciousness, not through a race or a tribe or some favored nation, but by and through the perfecting, after transformation, of the whole mass of matter, as well as what we now call soul. Nothing is or is to be left out. The aim for present man is his initiation into complete knowledge. And for the other kingdoms below him that may be raised up gradually from stage to stage to be in time initiated also. This, Judge says, is evolution carried to its highest power. It is a magnificent prospect. It makes of man a god and gives to every part of nature the possibility of being one day the same. There is strength and nobility in it. For by this, no man is dwarfed and belittled. Thus, our human soul, the causal body, acquires knowledge and skills as part of its spiritual evolutionary journey toward complete self-conscious awareness with the all. We begin the human journey aware of only the personal aspects of the self, the body, the emotions and feelings and daily thoughts, with an underlying awareness of I. However, the I at this point is completely self-involved, self-motivated. Its perspective is selfish. The education of the soul requires that we move beyond this. And so here we come to the core of our discussion, soul education. So according to a paraphrased version of our earlier definition of education, the soul must be involved in acquiring knowledge or skills, developing the powers of reasoning and judgment, and preparing itself for spiritual life. Two primary tenets of the Ageless Wisdom teachings clarify the way in which the soul is educated: reincarnation and karma. As you know, these are immense topics. So we're just going to talk about them a little bit, and especially as they relate to the education of the soul. It is through the experience of successive incarnations and the karma that attends those incarnations that the soul garners the knowledge and wisdom it needs to grow. In his article, The Necessity for Reincarnation, Judge writes, and I'm going to apologize to you because the next 3 slides are quotes from this article by Judge, but they are so beautiful. There's just no other way to share the information. He tells us that only through reincarnations can knowledge of human life be made exhaustive. A perfected man must have experienced every type of earthly relation and duty, every phase of desire, affection, and passion, every form of temptation, and every variety of conflict. Reincarnations give rise for the development of all those faculties, which can only be developed during incarnation. We can readily see, he says, that some of the richest soul acquirements come only through contact with human relations and through suffering from human ills. Of these, sympathy, toleration, patience, energy, fortitude, foresight, gratitude, pity, beneficence, and altruism are examples. Only through reincarnation is the unsatisfying nature of material life fully demonstrated. One incarnation, he tells us, proves merely the futility of its own conditions to secure happiness. To force home the truth that all are equally so, all must be tried. In time, the soul sees that a spiritual being cannot be nourished on inferior food, and that any joy short of union with the divine must be illusionary. The education of the lower, the subordination of the lower to the higher nature is made possible by many earth lives. Not a few lives are needed to convince that the body is but a case and not a constituent of the real ego. Others, that it and its passions must be controlled by that ego. Until the spirit has full sway over the flesh, the man is unfit for a purely spiritual existence. The meaning of universal brotherhood becomes apparent only as the veil of self and selfish interest thins. And this it does only through that slow emancipation from conventional beliefs, personal errors, and contracted views which a series of reincarnations effects. A deep sense of human solidarity presupposes a fusion of the one in the many. The one in the whole. A process extending over many lives. Judge also tells us in his article, The Necessity for Reincarnation, that desire for other forms of earthly experience can only be extinguished by undergoing them. It is obvious that any one of us, if now translated to the unseen world, would feel regret that he had not tasted existence in some other situation or surroundings. He would wish to have known what it was to possess rank or wealth or beauty, or to live in a different race or climate, or to see more of the world and society. No spiritual ascent could progress while earthly longings were dragging back the soul. And so it frees itself from them by successively securing and dropping them. Reincarnations give scope for exact justice to every man. True awards must be given largely on the plane whereon they have been incurred, else their nature is changed, their effects are impaired, and their collateral bearings lost. Physical outrage has to be checked by the infliction of physical pain, and not merely by the arousing of internal regret. And finally, reincarnations secure variety and copiousness to the discipline we all require. Very much of this discipline comes through the senses, through the conditions of physical life, and through psychophysiological processes, all of which would be absent from a post-mortem state. Considered as training or as penal infliction for a wrong done, a repeated return to earth is needful for fullness of discipline. So, although Judge does not specifically mention karma, it is implied in his writing. It is the effect of karma through our successive reincarnations that pushes us towards spiritual growth, that educates the soul. When have you learned the most? For me, and I'm guessing for almost all of us, we learn the most when we have dealt with and hopefully overcome some difficulty. HPB also talks about this in her pamphlet, Reincarnation and Karma. She says, the inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement, and such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical, but mental and intellectual. She continues, and this is how it is in the course of our lives. The trouble that comes upon us is always just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. If we look at it from a wider point of view, we shall see that we are trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point, that our growth, to be real growth, must progress evenly throughout, just as the body of a child grows, not first the head and then a hand, followed perhaps by a leg, but in all directions at once, regularly and imperceptibly. Humanity's tendency, she says, is to cultivate each part separately, neglecting the others in the meantime. Every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part, which expansion is rendered more difficult by the effects of the cultivation bestowed elsewhere. So therefore, the education of the soul comes about through reincarnation and karma. To put it very simply, physical life with its trials and tribulations is the school in which our soul is educated. These great laws of reincarnation and karma are the conduit for our education. We have learned a great deal through our past incarnations. For example, have you ever wondered why you don't wake up in the morning thinking about how to manipulate others to get what you want? Why don't you steal? Why don't you kill? Why do you come to discussions like this? Or other incredible programs offered by ULT in San Diego? As HPB writes in Key to Theosophy, to what do you attribute intuition, the voice of conscience, premonitions, vague, undefined reminiscences, etc.? If the intelligent faculty, sudden revivals of memory, should be rendered more comprehensive, it would require only a different and appropriate organization, the body celestial instead of the body terrestrial, to bring before every human soul the collective experience of its whole past existences rather. In the article, Reincarnation by De Perucker and Catherine Tingley, we read, all consciousness in its various degrees of development, and consequently all knowledge and wisdom and faculty, are but reminiscences of former existences, which reminiscences each new life develops and increases and improves. The great Greek philosopher Plato called this body of reminiscences by the one word anamnesis, or recollection, meaning the gathering together into a coherent unity of all the energetic consciousness activities that the being in the preceding incarnation was. This, in a sense, is truly recollection or rememorization of the past, not indeed of details, but of the psychological resultants. Excuse me. Clearly, our souls have learned, and the psychological results of those lessons remain deeply embedded within us. As seekers for truth, as aspirants who wish to serve humanity as quickly and as fully as possible, we can make the decision to accelerate the education of our soul in this lifetime. To do so, we work with the personality. Specifically, our work revolves around understanding and controlling our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. These three aspects of the self, physical, emotional or astral, and lower mental, connect almost instantaneously. Joy Mills, former president of the Theosophical Society in America and international vice president of the T.S. Adyar, writes that HPB stated explicitly that the next developmental stage in our evolution would have, quote, more to do with psychology than with physics. Joy tells us that the focus of our work today is at the psychological level, the second of the three streams of evolution. It involves dealing with the intellectual or kama-manasic field of operation within us, where the process to be undergone is known as metempsychosis. This is the critical area of the psychomental complex where the battle for the preservation of our humanness is waged. As said so often by HPB and her successors, as well as by her teachers, it is a change in consciousness that is required today. Consciousness or intelligence is primary. Only a profound change in consciousness can bring about those changes in the world that will halt our nearly willful destruction of the planet. The divine alchemy of individual transformation brings about, as a logical consequence, the transformation of the world. The ancient yet ageless road of self-transformation must be taken today in full awareness of the theurgical task before us. There is no other way to go. If we ourselves are in darkness, the world cannot know light. Within ourselves, she says, are met all the possibilities for world destruction or world redemption. When we know how to bear the pain and burden of the world's sorrow, we will know how to transmute that sorrow into supreme joy. And she ends this section of her article with a quote from the Voice of the Silence that says, "Thou art enlightened, choose thy way." Well, in order to understand and ultimately control these aspects of our personality, it is essential that we become self-aware. and that we practice objective self-observation. We can't change something unless we know that it needs to be changed. Observations of our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors is the key to making the necessary changes in the Kama Manasic field of consciousness. This is my very poor rendering of the Kama Manasic field. For instance, when someone cuts us off in traffic, we may become annoyed or flustered and think that the other person is a fool for almost causing an accident. Our Kama Manas is in an uproar, as hopefully the slide indicates. It is in control of us. We are not in control of it. And y'all, we can think of hundreds of similar situations and even more distressing situations in which something occurs and the behavior, emotions, and thoughts which immediately follow take over our consciousness. Now, let me be very clear here. I am not suggesting that we push our feelings or thoughts away. We have thoughts and feelings for a reason. They are part of our physical existence. They're part of our human experience. And we learn from them, or at least eventually we will. Rather, I'm suggesting that we become aware of them, identify their origin, and then handle them appropriately. This is managing the emotional and lower mental fields of consciousness in a healthy way that promotes spiritual growth. We know energy cannot be destroyed. Emotions and thoughts are energy. So pushing them away or pushing them down, as we typically tend to do as humans, does not do any good. They remain with us, just pushed under the surface. They will return, usually in the worst possible place or worst possible time. As seekers, our role in managing the Kama Manasic field of our consciousness is threefold. To consciously recognize what thoughts and feelings we are experiencing. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Instead of just reacting to them unconsciously, which is what many, many people do, and which I'm assuming on occasion we all do as well. And then once we've identified them, to start thinking about them. Where did they come from? Why am I reacting to this? Am I afraid of something? Am I feeling vulnerable? Where does this lead back? Is this conditioning? If so, where did this conditioning come from? Where did I pick it up during this physical incarnation? And how do I step away from it? And finally, to determine an appropriate way to manage the thoughts and feelings, to manage the Kama Manas, rather than having it control us. This, of course, will be unique to each individual. We're all unique, even though we are all rooted in the one. So some people may find that journaling is helpful. Others may find exercise helpful, reading, being in nature, meditating, any number of things. But it is essential that we learn to manage it in an appropriate way in order for our souls to grow. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Just 3 steps. We all just want 3 steps. Well, It's not, of course. It's very difficult on a daily basis because we are actually taking back control from aspects of the self that have been in control for incarnations. Additionally, it requires, at least from my perspective, a great deal of strength and courage to look at the origin of our thoughts and feelings, many of which may be rooted in areas that we don't even want to admit to ourselves exist, much less look at them and explore them. Ask the questions of ourselves that may show we're not quite who we wish we were and who we will eventually one day be. So, to put this discussion in a more practical light, let's look at an example. Here's poor Joe. He's trimming limbs from the trees in his yard using a chainsaw. He loses his balance and cuts his leg deeply. Some may assume that this incident is due to karma. Joe, who may not know anything about karma, is focused on physical pain and may also be feeling tremendous anger or fear. His thoughts may turn to whatever divine source he acknowledges, like God, perhaps. He may even ask God to take care of him and save him, not let him die. He may promise God that in return for being saved, he'll live a good life in some way. Whether or not it's karma is unimportant. What is important, besides the obvious medical attention he needs, is the situation in front of him. Even his initial thoughts and feelings are understandable in this situation. And while many of us may think different things or have different feelings, I think it's probably reasonable to assume that in a crisis situation, at least initially, the kama manas of each of us would immediately take control. But we can take this a step further. Let's assume that Joe's life is saved, but the muscles in his leg are badly damaged, and he may never be able to use it again. Well, we may quickly assume that this terrible injury is due to karmic circumstances. We may wonder if in a previous lifetime Joe was in combat and severed the legs of his enemies, or Joe took advantage of people who were physically challenged in some way, or that he lacked compassion for individuals who struggled, treating them unkindly or even viciously. We can wonder indefinitely, but really, it does not matter. What matters is how Joe handles this situation and how we handle our situations. Joe's response, physically, emotionally, and cognitively to the situation is critical in terms of spiritual growth, in terms of his soul's education. Joe can choose to become angry or depressed over this devastating injury, focusing only on what he has lost and allowing his kama manas to be in control, remaining stuck in the swirl of emotions and thoughts. Or Joe can use the situation to grow and learn in ways that are unique to him and to his evolutionary journey, in ways that increase his compassion and empathy for others. What I am suggesting is that in order to gain control over, or perhaps manage is a better term, his kama manas, he can work to identify what he's thinking and feeling. Angry or fearful or sad or all of those or even more. He can work to understand where it's coming from. Is he fearful of what his life might be like with use of only one leg? Is he conditioned to believe that his injury will limit the type of life he wants to live? And so on. And then work to handle his thoughts and feelings appropriately. Counseling, journaling, meditating, being in nature, something that allows him to take control of the kama manas. It is his choice alone. It is our choice, each one of us. He can choose to control the kama manas, choose actions that will further his evolutionary journey. I'm not saying that it's easy by any means, but it can be done. Look at all of the people we know in history who have found themselves in unfathomably difficult situations. Viktor Frankl, Anne Frank, Helen Keller, Sojourner Truth, just to name a few. It's a choice, and that choice determines the education of our soul. The difficulty of educating the soul through the experiences of the personality cannot be overstated. While living in the physical world, we are confronted by many opportunities for growth. And many of these situations are, as HPB says, and I quoted earlier, just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. It is essential for us to remember that there is no quick and easy path to spiritual transformation, to controlling these various aspects of ourselves in a healthy way. But what we can do is to focus on each step in the process so that we will not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task, but rather encouraged by each tiny step that we take. As we're faced with trials and tribulations in our lives, our karma, we choose our response. And that response determines what we will learn. We also know that if or when we don't learn all or even some of the lesson we've been offered, we will have another opportunity to do so at some time in the future. Progressive development, spiritual evolution will occur. In her article, A Process of Becoming, Grace Noke writes, "It is all a grand process of being and becoming, divinity in action through the perennial flux, ebb, and reflux of the life force, the rhythmic coming into being and vanishing of universes and their reappearance from the deeps of space. This is the old mystery of the one emanating the many, and the many, in the course of ages, becoming the one. We must seek to be in harmony with ourselves." She tells us, this sounds simple enough, yet how difficult we make life for ourselves and others when we get tangled up in knots of anxiety and fear. When all is serene within, and we feel the currents flowing gently through us, we are attuned to our higher self and to the unspoken need of our neighbor. We are, at least momentarily, in synchrony with nature's rhythm. With an ever receding horizon of opportunity before us, we can dare to believe in ourselves and in humanity's future. And we won't have to ask when life begins. We will know that life ever is, has always been, and always will be. For a human being is far more than what we see. Inwardly, whatever our current karma, we have a long history stretching back far beyond this present life, an ancestry of soul experience that has been eons in the making and holds the promise of unimagined richness, of quality and power to be unfolded in future cycles. May we commit to an acceleration of our soul's experiences, regardless of the difficulties inherent in that commitment, so that we may serve humanity and synchronize with nature's rhythm. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I wanted it to keep going. Quite wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Judy has her hand up.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That was absolutely amazing and wonderful discussion of soul education. But I'm wondering if we also can go to the idea of social education first. There is an idea presented by Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, who was a Swiss educator who was so against this idea, so inherent in our civilizations, religions, that the child is some sort of a sinful little being. So, let's beat the ideas into him or her. And so he developed the idea of Sozialerziehung, social education, that we need to educate the child for the betterment of the whole and not just to aggrandize the personality or the ego for success. And yet I found in my university teaching that exactly what most of the students were taught was, well, we have to major in business, otherwise we'll never get a job, which of course is not true. And we have to just compete with the other person. So it seems that going to the idea, Socrates said that the soul deserves care for all time, is very difficult because we're in such a terrible hole of competing with each other, as HPB says in the Key to Theosophy. And you so beautifully pointed out these points. But I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the idea of soul education and the notion of social education as well. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Well, thank you, Judy. I think you just did it beautifully. Absolutely. Our society is very confused about the way we educate children. And that's been pointed out by so many educators over the years, many of whom have roots in theosophical teachings a great deal. My perspective, or the only thing that I would add to what you've said, is that as our consciousness transforms, as we work on ourselves, and the consciousness of the world, all of life, then transforms, then those parents who are raising the children will start to see them in a different light. Our systems in our society, not just education, but all of the systems in our society will then begin to change. So it is incumbent upon us, I think, or I feel it for me, to work on myself as much as I possibly can, because I feel like that is what let me just also say that I will go out and protest and march and teach and talk and whatever. I'll do that too. But what I have most control over is me. And so as I change me, as each one of us changes ourselves, then the mental consciousness of the world changes. And heavens to Betsy, that's what we need. That's an old saying, right? Heavens to Betsy, sorry. But that's what we need to change our society, but we could, anyway. So I could just go on and on. I could get on a soapbox and go. So I'm going to stop there. But thank you, Judy. So true, so accurate.
Thank you.
You got Eugene is wanting to
As usual, I just wanted to say, hey, Barbara, thanks for being here. It was great hearing you. It was perfect. It was clear. It was powerful, and I enjoyed it very, very much. So please come back again.
I would love to. I love being here with all of you. You give me, actually, it's a real challenge for me because I'm not as deep a student as I would like to be, and I get caught up in administrative things. So you guys challenge me, and I'm very grateful to that.
We've got Jeffrey Clark from Japan, or in Japan, not from Japan.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one good thing about, or many good things about online classes or online talks. So it's great to hear from you. And you are a deep student. It's wonderful. A very inspiring talk. I wonder, I'm a teacher and I give homework assignments. I wonder, do you think that in each incarnation that we have a certain assignment or assignments?
I do. I might not necessarily call it an assignment, but that's just language, and language means nothing. Truly, I mean, it does mean things, but it's words mean different things to different people. I think my personal perspective, and I don't know this, it's what I feel inside, is that before we come into incarnation, oh, thank you, Truth. Oh, you're so good. You're much faster than me. Thank you. Is that before we come into incarnation, we've made a decision about some of the things that we want to work on. And I think we choose situations that we are likely to be faced with. I don't believe that everything's predestined, but I think that there are opportunities that may provide us with what we want to work on in a particular life. And as I get older and look back on my life, I see where I think that has happened, where I had to make choices, and one choice led me deeper into the Ageless Wisdom teachings, and one would have led me elsewhere. And so that's my perspective, yes.
Is there a way or an approach that we can discover or tune into these, I don't know, I mean, assignments or tasks or goals?
Again, just my perspective. Because I'm a seeker, just like everybody. I have no specific answers, real answers. I have lots of opinions, and even more thoughts. From my perspective, it's when a similar situation keeps happening for us. Mm-hmm. Every time I get slapped in the face by the same kind of thing, it makes me want to stop and say, okay, this is something I'm supposed to learn from. What am I supposed to learn from this? Because I really want to do it. I don't want to get slapped in the face with it again. And maybe in another incarnation, slapped even harder, so to speak. So I do think that we can do it in that way. I think also if we're quiet and we listen to that voice within, I think sometimes we can just kind of know. But it's an internal knowing that won't have any proof with it. But I think it's really what hits us hits us in the face, because we've all chosen a path where we are seeking truth, where we are studying the ageless wisdom, where we've said, hey, I want to help humanity. I want to be a part of this. And so I think that once we make that declaration aloud or inside of ourselves, we are immediately speeding things up. And we are going to be faced with more and more. And so it becomes pretty evident, I think, pretty clearly what we're supposed to learn, I think. But love, for me, is always at the basis of everything. And it's that deep love for all of life, all of humanity. Like many people love their families. I said that one time, and I said, like everybody loves their family. And somebody caught me and said, not everybody loves their family. I thought, oh, you're right. But like many people love their families, if we loved all of humanity like we love those special people to us, my goodness, what a difference it would make. So love, I think, is always at the basis. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you.
Looks like Marlon has a hand up.
Hello.
Hello. First, I want to thank you so much. This is my second time to get to hear you, and you're always so interesting and so organized, I will say. And next, I also want to apologize. I had to leave you for a few minutes because our daughter phoned, and she had just been elected to the California Academic Senate. And so I wanted to congratulate her, but it also fits into our discussion here. She has been working at San Francisco City College as the equity person, equity in education. And it's not an easy position, as I think if we just think a little bit about what's going on in our country now, it's difficult things. So my question is, can you speak a little bit about justice, how one can live a just life where we have equality and yet we have differentiation, and harmony must fit in there some way also. And so could you speak a bit on the question of justice and education? And I might add also that I think we've made a mistake. Your point was to live, in a sense, I forget your phrase. It was to live preparing for the mature life.
Yes.
Now,
that was education, yes. And then I changed it to spiritual life, yes.
Yes. So someone who is academically brilliant has certain obligations and responsibilities. And in high school, I have to say, we had been saying, oh no, we're getting rid of auto mechanics. We're getting rid of all of these beautiful art forms because you have to take calculus so you can go to higher education. And it seems to me we're warping the idea of justice in that sense. So I'm sorry, but if you could, thank you so much. If you could speak to the question of justice, education, and spiritual growth.
So, I think that, again, an opinion, y'all, this is just an opinion. I think that we forget how important it is to work for social justice and for equity. Because as theosophists, we know that this is just a covering. That's all it is. And so in this lifetime, I'm wearing a female body, a white female body that lives in the South of the United States. And that we know that, and I know that in the next lifetime, I'll be wearing a different kind of body in a different culture, a different place, who knows, and have been multiple bodies before, that the body is just a coat. And so because we perceive that unity and know that we're all really the same inside, we don't stop and think about the fact that our society as a whole does not look at individuals that way. And the fear of differences, whether it's differences, well, all kinds of differences that are inherent in our world, that fear is exploding. Certainly seems to be exploding in the United States right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it is incumbent upon us as theosophists to do the very best that we can to work for social justice, for equity, in equity across the board, in everything. Because as we do that, we are making a personal statement that says, this is what I believe. We are modeling behavior for others who maybe haven't thought about it. And they're like, why are you doing this? Why are you marching? Why are you protesting? Why are you posting these things on your Facebook page? I don't do that because, as you know, the organizations, and I'm assuming that ULT is the same, the TSA is an apolitical organization. So I don't post anything on my Facebook page because of my role that might imply some political stuff. That doesn't mean that personally I don't do things as much as I can to get out there, to share my thoughts, to share my ideas. I'm not sure, Marlon, if that's what you're talking about. But I think we've got to recognize that, and I think we do in some way, but that the rest of the world doesn't see these differences the same way we do. And we need to help them understand that they're just temporary differences.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Barbara, I've got a question.
Sure.
Are you familiar with that kind of very mystical paragraph or two in The Secret Doctrine where they talk about, where HPB talks about the great sacrifice? Have you thought about that much and what that even is, and possibly in relation to our topic for today?
Again, I trying to figure out what HPB meant,
right,
is the work of lifetimes. So the great sacrifice, if we're talking about it in terms of our own souls, if we're talking about it in terms of our own evolutionary journeys, which is, I tend to focus more there, is that eventually, actually, what I said a few minutes ago, learning to love humanity like we love those very special people in our lives, in some ways, that's a sacrifice. It's not the great sacrifice. I'm not trying to say that. But it is a sacrifice, because then my children are loved the same way as I love the person down at the gas station down the street buying beer, which right now I'm not doing. But that's where I want to be. And so it kind of sacrifices that personal love for the universal love. The great sacrifice, when I think of that, I think, of course, of that fifth initiation, where, and this is not an area that I have a great deal of knowledge about. But that fifth initiation where when we get there, we give up everything. Everything. And it is for not the sins of humanity by any means, but it is because it changes the consciousness of humanity and pulls humanity further down that path. And it's when we let go of everything, which is really kind of hard to imagine, to contemplate. It's letting go of everything. I'm not sure, Jonathan, if that really responds to what is appropriate response for what you're asking, but
It's just beautiful, and just I really appreciate your help in trying to fathom that topic. So very beautiful. Thank you so much.
thank you.
We have time, I would say, for one more question. If Barbara is willing. I know she's able.
I am willing. I don't know, again, I have no answers, but I am really appreciative of the opportunity to be here with all of you. We are first cousins, I think,
That's right.
is how that works. First cousins.
That sounds like a Southern sentiment, but yeah.
Well, it is. I was thinking that as I was saying that in the South, I know my cousins out to about the fourth or fifth level. So, and they all live close, of course. So, but yes.
And your y'all is precious. So.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
And I do, and I think I said this before, I do have a tendency, I do write my talk, because when I'm using that as a basis, I don't slip into my Southern accent as much.
Yeah.
Because
it was a wonderful compendium of readings, bringing out the topic. So, yeah, we ought to put all that together in one place and make that into an article, I'm sure. Thank you, Barbara, so much.
thank you.
Anybody who would like to come to more of these Aquarian presentations, via Zoom, just email me if they know my email, or reply to Truth's invites and just say, hey, put me on. And you're more than welcome to come to these. And next week we'll be taking a look at the topic of the Buddha vow, which probably has something to do with that great sacrifice topic.
Yes.
So, Barbara, again, thank you very, very much. What a privilege.
Thanks to all of you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you.